Welcome, everybody, to Humanities Days 2016. The Global Humanities Institute of Montgomery College is very proud to bring to the attention of the college community issues of global concern. Today, we are going to have a presentation on China, women, violence, and social change. Intimate partner violence against women in China is known as a serious humanitarian issue. Change has been difficult to foster for many reasons, including deeply rooted cultural ideology, which stresses the hierarchical relationship between husband and wife. Professor Esther Schwartz-McKinzie will present on this issue. She has taught developmental writing, composition, women's studies, and literature courses at Montgomery College as a full-time faculty member since 2001. She has her PhD in British and American 19th century literature from Temple University, and her research and published work has focused on recovering lost women's voices, especially those who used popular media as a venue to speak out against inequality, sexual violence, and domestic violence. Professor Schwartz-McKinzie currently serves on the Title IX Advisory Committee and is a member of the Middle States Committee addressing Standard 2, Ethics and Integrity. Please welcome Professor Schwartz-McKinzie.
Thank you, Professor Bronstein, and thank you all for being here. It's a pleasure to see my students and all of these wonderful students. Thank you to Professor LeBlanc's class for coming. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and domestic violence is a problem here in the U.S. and around the world. Men and women are victims of domestic violence, but overwhelmingly, women are the victims of men who are their intimate partners. Today, we'll be taking a look at domestic violence in China, a country which has experienced unprecedented economic growth and development over the past 2 decades. Does the status of women automatically advance as a country advances? What does activism look like in a country that doesn't have the First Amendment speech rights that we take for granted, and that in fact actively desires to control speech in the classroom, in the media, and even online? And what does resistance look like? Before I go further, I do want to tell you that this presentation has some upsetting content. And if you are feeling stressed out or upset, it's okay if you need to take a break. We've made sure that everybody has a copy of Montgomery College's Title IX brochure, and that has information about support here at the college and in the community. And if you need to talk with somebody about that, Professor Bronstein can direct you, and I also can talk with you after the presentation. Okay, so let's do big picture first. Worldwide, 1 in 3 women suffers physical or sexual violence. This is an epidemic. Now, we are making progress. In 1995, 13 out of 100 countries had laws against domestic violence. But now, that number is closer to 76 out of 100. Enforcement is really difficult, and change takes time, and many, many women are still at risk. The thing is that in these countries, change is slow because too often violence has been normalized. It's seen as an ordinary part of intimate relationships, especially in marriage. Now, over the past 4 decades, a spotlight has been on China. We have known during this time that domestic violence is a serious human rights issue, and the Chinese government does not like being told what to do, but also wants the world's good opinion. And one of the things that you'll see as this talk progresses is how activists have managed to leverage that. So here are some current statistics. Surveys suggest that up to 40% of women in China suffer domestic violence. And this is believed to be even a higher percentage in rural areas. Now, the thing is that over the past 20 years, this rate has been increasing. In fact, it's increased by over 25%. So America still has a problem, certainly. But our trend has been downward since 1994, which is when the Violence Against Women Act was first authorized, and it was just recently authorized 2 years ago. So think about this. China has a population of over 3,371 million people. However, there are only 50,000 reports of violence registered annually. So this is not something that people are seeking help for. So, can anybody maybe suggest why I'm calling these factors familiar? What do you think? These are some of the factors that perpetuate violence against women. Any ideas? Well, men are rarely prosecuted. Police usually refuse to intervene. Battering is not usually acknowledged as a grounds for divorce. And many people believe that spousal abuse is justified in many cases, particularly when women do things like refuse sex or burn the food or speak up and argue. Now, these factors are really cementing. In America, we have marital property laws. That means that when a married couple is divorcing, the property the property that's owned, both partners have a right to that income from that property. But in China, there aren't marital property laws. And in fact, women's property ownership has been decreasing. Home ownership by law and by custom is usually male. Also, there are really few support structures for victims of domestic violence. So think about it. If women don't own the property, if only husbands own the home, the ground beneath a battered woman's feet is literally not secure. And without a shelter to go to, there's no safe space. This really illustrates for us how power, at its core, is very much about economics. There are also tremendous social pressures that predispose women to violence. One is the pressure for women to marry very young. In fact, in China, by the time a woman is reaching her mid-20s, she is considered an old woman, a leftover woman, a yellowed pearl. This often means giving up on one's education and on having a career. And in fact, laws and regulations actively work to reduce the number of women seeking higher education. Test scores and quotas are prohibitive for women applicants. This creates a situation where in interpersonal relationships, men hold the balance of power. In China and in many parts of the world, domestic violence is taboo to discuss, and victims are often blamed. This can't be stressed enough. Where women can't talk about what's happening to them, there is no possibility of support or response. Here in the United States, we also blame victims. She deserved it. She was asking for it. This is a strategy for silencing that is very powerful. However, in China, that culture of silence is being newly challenged by social media, which has produced global and domestic forums for exchange, support, activism, and discussion. Has anyone heard of the Great Firewall? No? Yeah, can you tell us what that is?
China basically has the power to view what they control everything, including like the internet and stuff like that. So you can only view certain things, and if you do view the wrong things, it's considered I think know the right word, traitor maybe, or it's against the law.
Yes. So sometimes speaking out is criminalized in China. And the Great Firewall is the instrument that China uses to control online speech. Speech is often blocked altogether or redacted or involves criminal prosecution. But people still do it. Censorship efforts are often messy and incomplete, and new forums continually spring up. It's kind of like Pandora and that box. It's really hard to stuff something back in there once you've opened it up, right? So, this is a snapshot of change in China. Over 10 years, China has gained 550 million relatively new internet users. That's a lot. And researchers and sociologists are interested in how Chinese social media allows for the dissemination of narratives that counter dominant social narratives. Now, this is pretty interesting. This is from a New York Times article 1 week ago, and journalists tracked a blog where women discussed marriage. And you can see that many comments are redacted or omitted, but listen to some of these. Well, one can be very happy alone. Why seeking out a burden? Or, some men's sense of patriarchal is just too much. You have to wonder what was omitted. Again, these are anonymous online forum where people are getting affirmation of their ideas by talking with other people. It's important to understand that these comments are not things that people can say freely in many contexts in China. The comments suggest what some sociologists are calling an alternative public sphere, where people are finding validation not available in other places. Now, there are two stories, two events that happened relatively close to each other. This is history in the making. This is something that's happening, ongoing right now. There are two very high-profile stories of battered women in China which have stoked a movement. The first one is a woman named Li Yan. She's a rural woman from the Sichuan province in China. And the other is Kim Lee. She is the American wife of a Chinese celebrity. He's the founder of an English language learning program called Crazy English. So everybody in China knows who this guy is. Li Yan suffered incredible abuse over many years. She repeatedly tried to get help. She was beaten so badly that she had numerous hospital admissions for cigarette burns, At one point, her husband cut off one of her fingers. She was being terrorized. And everywhere she went, she talked to people in the health field, she talked to neighbors, she talked to family, and everyone told her, go back home. Make it nice. Make up with your husband. Show him you're a good wife. Finally, during a particularly brutal beating, she fought back and she killed him, and she was immediately sentenced to execution without reprieve. Now, this was something that activists found out about, and they launched such a successful media campaign that her death sentence was overturned. Now, this is unheard of because in America we have this idea that self-defense in a case like this is a factor to be considered. But in China, self-defense in a case of domestic violence was not something that could be considered. So, her death sentence was overturned. She is now serving life in prison. This is considered a victory. You can see here this slide from Amnesty International's campaign to save Leon. And here's a comment from the East Asia Program Director of Amnesty International. And he comments on the skillful advocacy by women's rights activists. And even though this seems like a sad victory, she's spending her life in jail, he called it a foothold for future cases. Now, here's the story of Kim Lee, and this is a very different story. Kim Lee was also a victim of abuse, and she not only went repeatedly to the police and to the hospital and to other places for help, but when she realized that that wasn't happening, when she realized that the police were intentionally losing her reports, when she got told to be a good girl and go back to her husband, she decided to post images of her injuries on Weibo, which is China's equivalent of Twitter. And before they could be taken down, those images went viral. This couldn't be ignored. In the end, she was granted a divorce, which again, domestic violence was not a grounds for divorce at this time, so that was very unusual and very striking. She also was given compensation. This was the first time that domestic violence was discussed openly on the state-run China Central Television, and it was also the very first time that a restraining order was issued in China. This is one of the pictures that she posted on Weibo. And this is Kim Lee now. She has become an activist against domestic violence. So, those two events help to stoke a movement. You can see here that these young women are dressed in bridal dresses, spattered with blood, and the posters read, "Only equality is harmonious. When violence is around, are you still silent?" And by the way, one of these activists did end up in jail for a subsequent act of defiance. Here is a 2014 billboard in Beijing about putting a stop to domestic violence. So you can see that there's energy behind the movement. But there's also a lot of tension. Last year, 5 women activists were imprisoned for planning to pass out anti-sexual harassment brochures on public transportation. You might have heard about them in the news. They were dubbed the Feminist Five, and they were released only after there was so much domestic and international outrage, including, by the way, a very fiery speech by Hillary Clinton. So, and here you can see that an art exhibition which was planned last year was shut down by the government at the last minute, no explanation. Still, there is a clear new direction. Just at the very end of last year, China passed an historic domestic violence law, and this law has the potential to reverse current trends. So here's what the law does. It prohibits domestic violence. It gives victims of domestic violence access to redress, including restraining orders. And it also tells judges and prosecutors that in cases of self-defense, they need to consider domestic violence when defendants are victims. So, there are still a lot of limitations of the law. These are serious limitations. Most especially, it's important to understand that traditional ideas about family and gender remain very strong. Many resist the idea that a law can tell them what to do. This sounds familiar, right? Or that the government should tell them what to do. The biggest problem is that a law like this is very ambitious, and it takes a long time and a lot of dedicated resources to develop the infrastructure to support victims. I thought that this comment from a leading Chinese activist was very striking. This law is like fruit that is not yet ripe. It tastes a bit sour. Now, since this law was passed, there's been another really shocking case of domestic violence in China, which has gained international attention. A 24-year-old rural woman, Li Hongjie, was choked to death by her husband in her hospital bed while she was recovering from head injuries from an earlier beating. She had sought help, including posting online about her abuse and seeking support from other people. She was told, "Think positively, you'll get through it." Family, healthcare professionals, neighbors, police, every single person she talked to sent her back to her husband. Her family, perhaps emboldened by the recent media campaigns and the fact that this issue is something people are talking about, launched a very unusual protest. Her husband was sentenced to execution with a reprieve, which means that he probably will spend the rest of his life in jail. That was an immediate determination. Nobody fought for him to avoid execution. People described his crime as impulsive, and the judge acknowledged that this crime was different than regular acts of violence because they were married. So her family wanted people to know about this and wanted people to care about this, and they refused to bury her. She was placed in a refrigerated coffin, and that coffin sat for at least 2 months in the house that she shared with her husband, and this image was shown worldwide. It was in all of the major newspapers in the United States. So, why do these images matter? Why do words matter here? Discussion and communication can help to generate change in the way people think, and it's the foundation for change in what they do. So I want to share with you one last example of current activism, and this is a video that was made by a Japanese producer, and it was just released in April of this year, and it was made to fight the stigma that unmarried women face in Chinese society. And despite internet controls, this video went viral in China.
不是小孩子了，
把自己嫁出去，
你一天不结婚，父亲就不死。
不要任性。
可怜天下父母心啊！ 挑来挑去的。
大概不合适。
到个年龄就应该结婚。
你现在已经是剩女了。
剩女这个词给人的感觉就是剩下来的女人。给我的感觉就是说，其实好像25岁以后还不结婚就是剩女了。
可能会被别人说，或者被家人催，或者有些社会的压力吧。所以过年回家是压力最大的，因为全部人都会在问你，你都多大了，还没结婚呢？
你年龄也不小啦。
他们就可能觉得，就是在中国这个社会，就是一定要结婚，那才是一个完整的女人。
你还在城外的感觉。
以前拉着对象，那就人家已经结婚了。
我个人认为，我不太喜欢人民广场的相亲角，然后可能都是父母，然后拿了一个女儿或者儿子的介绍，然后放在那边。
收入啊，工作是什么样子的？有没有房子？有没有车子？
挂个招商启事给卖出去是那种。中华儿女嘛，就是孝为当先，因为他反正就不结婚肯定是就是不孝的一种。
以前我总认为我的女儿肯定性格好嘛，人也不是长得太漂亮，一般嘛，所以到现在还是生下来了。
渴望真爱，对我还是很渴望爱情的。
赶快把它解决好了，算了，你不要太残忍了，对吗？
也许想要放弃找个自己喜欢的、适合的也挺好。
你说要真正找不着，也是我们老两口一个心病。
可能这方面我比较自私，我想跟他说对不起。然后我希望我这样的一个状态非常能够得到父母的认可。
我就算一个人，就是幸福、快乐、自信的，然后好好过。
后来想开了，就是我说剩女，那我工作强了，现在有女强人嘛，这么一说的话，
直到等到那个对的人，妈妈永远支持你。
对于自己生活这件事，我是很开心的，然后很自由，我也享受一个人的状态。
我女儿很美，剩女很光荣啊。独立人也应该活得很精彩的，这就是我想。
他如果觉得单身的也蛮好，我们还是会尊重他的。
是优秀的女孩啊，剩男要努力呀。
自信，独立，热爱生活，不错的一位女性。
This is from Kathy Russell, who is the U.S. Ambassador at Large for Global Women's Issues, and she says, and she's been very involved in thinking about China. She says, no country has ended domestic violence, but breaking the silence and opening the discussion in homes, communities, and countries takes us one step closer to achieving this goal. Thank you.